Hey, let's bring in Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, a Fox News contributor and founder of Gingrich360.com and host of the podcast Newt's World. Newt, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's good to be with you guys.
Mr. Speaker, we have some breaking news this morning. About an hour and a half ago, it was announced by the foreign minister of Israel that they were going to allow Rashida Tlaib to get into Israel after she wrote a letter to the interior minister, and they granted her access to the country on humanitarian grounds.
This is what she said in the letter. I would like to request admittance to Israel in order to visit my relatives, and specifically my grandmother, who's in her 90s and lives in this certain area there in the West Bank. This could be my last opportunity to see her. I will respect any restrictions and will not promote boycotts against Israel during my visit. What's your response to that?
Look, I think she made the right humanitarian request. I think the Israelis had the right instinct because she is in a unique position, having relatives there. And frankly, I think it'd be very heartless to say, you know, you can't visit your grandmother in her 90s. Right. So I think probably she did the right thing. She recognized that the Israelis had a legitimate grievance, and she agreed to abide by their ground rules. And the Israelis then said, look, as long as you're going to play fair, we don't want to keep you from your grandmother. Right. Strikes me that's a pretty win-win psychological position.
Okay, so what does the Israeli government do about Ilhan Omar, who was denied access after the president tweeted out, if Israel lets him in, it's going to show weakness, and then Netanyahu came out and said, okay, we're going to bar both of them. Now, Tlaib gets to go, but we don't know what's going to happen with Omar.
Well, I don't know that Omar, who I believe is Somalian, not Palestinian, has any family relatives living in the area. So they're very different circumstances. And frankly, I think it's a bit much to say to the Israelis, somebody gets to say hateful things, gets to follow a policy designed to destroy your country, gets to defame you, gets to lie about your history, but you owe them admission. I think that's baloney. So I think the Israeli decision not to let her in is perfectly reasonable. She does not have, unlike Tlaib, she does not have a humanitarian reason for the Israelis to allow her in.
All right.
So last night there was the Trump rally, and the president said, why are you laughing?
Because it's August. He could slow down a little bit and sort of rest and
He's
think.
On vacation.
And, you know, but no, he goes wandering off. His idea of a vacation is 12,000 people cheering for an hour and a half. I mean, it's,
all right, well, if folks missed it, here's
what are you going to say?
Here's some sound bites from the rally last night. Listen to this.
Let me tell you, if for some reason I wouldn't have won the election, these markets would have crashed. The bottom line is, I know you like me, and this room is a love fest, I know that, but you have no choice but to vote for me because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me. You have the best unemployment. You have the most successful state in the history of your state and in the history of our country. And then you're going to vote for somebody else? Oh, great. Let's vote for Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren.
You know, Mr. Speaker, you're the perfect person to ask this question. You know, when you were running the House, you had a bunch of bipartisan initiatives with the Clinton presidency, and the economy did quite well that you could take credit for as Republicans, and the president would as well. That's not the case with President Trump. Tax reform was unilateral. There were no Democrats on board. He's smart, is he not, to focus on the economy, knowing the Democrats have nothing to say other than to talk down an obviously flourishing economy right now.
Sure. Look, I think part of why you saw the consumer purchases up is people have had a very substantial pay raise. Interestingly, from a standpoint of Democrats, the people who have had the biggest percentage pay raises have been in the bottom fourth of the country.
That's right.
And so people actually have more money. In addition, the president's very pro-oil and gas policy has lowered the cost. I once wrote a book called Gasoline at $2.50 a gallon and had Obama attack me personally because it was impossible. Well, every time you bring down the price of gasoline and natural gas, it's the equivalent of a tax cut. And people have more cash to spend on other things. So I think right now we're in a win-win economy. No, we're going to have bumps. Again, free enterprise, things happen and people have to churn and they have to invent. But over time, they're remarkable engines for creating prosperity. And this president is a businessman who understands the importance of the economy.
Well, he also understands the importance of the calendar. And the reason he was in New Hampshire is because New Hampshire is the first in the country state to have a primary. Joe Biden has been there. He's been campaigning. The problem with Joe Biden, and some of his advisors have suggested, you know, he's made so many gaffes, so many mistakes. Maybe he should scale back. In fact, this is a headline out of the Hill. Biden allies float scaling back events to limit gaffes. And then David Axelrod tweeted this. This is bad advice. You can't cloister the candidate and win. He can either cut it or he can't, and the only way he can prove he can is to be an active and vigorous candidate. He's running for president of the United States, for God's sake. That, according to David Axelrod, Mr. Speaker.
You know, David, who runs a great a political science institute out at the University of Chicago, is, I think, one of the great masters of modern politics. And I read the article, and he's exactly right. I mean, either Biden can play in the arena or he can't play in the arena. I think he is a gradually decaying candidacy. I think that he gets a little weaker every week. I think the most interesting thing, and I confess I was wrong about this, I thought Kamala Harris would come on strong. But the gap, her failure to perform has created a gap for Elizabeth Warren, who now is doing surprisingly well. And I just have a hunch that Biden will continue to decay. I think that Senator Sanders will continue to decay. And I suspect you'll see, by the time we get to Iowa and New Hampshire, a totally different Democratic race.
It's interesting that you bring up that Elizabeth Warren is doing better, because if you look at a Fox News poll, Joe Biden in March got 31%. Now he's still getting 31%. Elizabeth Warren in March, Newt, was getting 4%, and today, now 20%. That's a huge jump. Right behind her is, well, Bernie Sanders. He was 23 in March. Now he's 10. Kamala Harris, she's still at 8%, and she was at 8% in March.
Yeah, and I think Sanders is the one who has the biggest problem because, you know, when he was the not Hillary, he was fresh, he was interesting, all the college students could get excited by him. Now he's just Bernie, and you know, being angry and yelling at people doesn't actually work very often in American politics. And we're watching Sanders sort of self-destruct, partly just based on style and partly on boredom. I mean, they've already heard everything he had to say, and he hasn't got anything new. As I said, I was wrong. The big surprise to me has been that Kamala Harris has been such a weak performer. And Elizabeth Warren is very, very smart. She's a little bit like your high school chemistry teacher. You know, she's a little cold, she's a little aloof. You know she's really, really smart, but you're not exactly sure you want her to be in charge of your life. And I think she is going to come on strong. And I just think that Biden's problem is, in the end, there's not much there. I mean, Joe is a nice, pleasant guy, but if you watch him over, as I have for most of his career, he's a little bit of a doofus. I mean, you know, he doesn't quite get things right, and he can't quite do things right. But, you know, I'm just old Joe, and you ought to like me because I'm Joe, and let's go have a beer together. Well, that probably doesn't get you to the presidency. I mean, it got him to the senator of a very small state, but I don't think it's going to get him to the presidency.
So, Mr. Speaker, your thoughts on the fact that President Trump may be eyeing his biggest real estate acquisition yet, Greenland. Did you read this story yesterday? It's terrific.
Look, first of all, if you elect a developer president, guess what he thinks about?
Right. Real estate, property, real estate.
The only surprise to me is if he's going to look around, I think he'd want a place where he could put 4 or 5 golf courses. I somehow don't think that winter golf in Greenland is going to be a big winner. I mean, again, Trump's a much better marketeer than I am, but I don't know that I want to go out and try to sell the market when you two have a chance to play on a glacier.
Yeah, Newt, we were reading this morning, and you're a student of history and a teacher of history. Apparently, in the 1860s, we were looking into acquiring that area. And then I think during the Truman years, there was some suggestion, well, could we get our hands on Greenland? So this is not necessarily a new idea.
No, look, first of all, it's always a little bit of an anomaly because it's actually owned by Denmark.
Right.
And you had periods, for example, when the Nazis occupied Denmark, and actually Greenland played a huge role in the invasion of Normandy because the Allied weather station at Greenland enabled us to know that there would be a break in a storm. And Eisenhower made the decision that we would land during this break. The Germans, who did not have any weather stations to the west, didn't know what was happening, and they thought the storm was going to continue. So Greenland, in a way, played a remarkably central role. And then, of course, we put the huge Thule air base up there when we were competing with the Soviet Union. I have a hunch that the Danes will not sell us Greenland. Knowing how Trump operates, you may end up with a U.S.-Greenland free trade agreement at some point. But I think that the Danes are probably going to continue to hold on to the rights there.
That could be the Greenland New Deal. Stay tuned for that. All right, Mr. Speaker,
right.
Thank you very much for joining us live. Have a wonderful weekend.